It has been roughly a single day since I released a video titled, "This Banned Mascot Horror Game Stole from Poppy Playtime." Please go watch that video if you haven't, there's no point in watching this one first. I went over the story of the mascot horror game Bokkie and how it was DMCA'd by Mob Entertainment because it used assets that were taken straight from Poppy Playtime, and I went over how the developer's response to this situation was deplorable. But when you break stories like this to any significant audience, all the parties involved are eager to say their piece and clarify the truth. I spoke with and got statements from AJB Games, the developer of Bokkie, Galactic Crows, a publisher that was collaborating with said developer, and a freelance modeler that is crucial to this story. Putting this story together after my original video was such a headache, but I am here to provide the most accurate retelling of what actually happened with Bokkie based on all the information provided by everyone involved. So the fact that Bokkie has copyrighted material is a known fact. It has been a known fact, obviously that's the only reason my video exists. It's been a known fact, the changes made after the DMCA were not sufficient enough and are bound to get the game taken down again, and the developer's response to the situation, in public and private, has been crazy inappropriate. It should not have taken my video for the developer to get their shit together. But so be it, and I stand by just about everything I said in my original video because of that. But who is actually to blame is where the new details come in, and where there is actually plenty of empathy to be had for the dev. Following my video, and following some statements from both AJB Games and Galactic Crows, AJB Games claimed that they never even made the model. Now, it's crazy that this has never been said prior to this moment. You would think that would be, like, the first thing you say 2 or 3 weeks ago when this all happened. AJB Games claimed that Galactic Crows made the model and supplied some evidence to back that up. Obviously, this raised some red flags in my mind. Galactic Crows is responsible for a lot of games, and we just had a conversation moments ago where I essentially absolved them of any wrongdoing. What the hell is going on? But it turns out that's not really the case. Galactic Crows did not make this model. It was commissioned through a freelancer that they work with, and it was originally made for Galactic Crows all the way back in 2022. Galactic Crows never used it, and eventually sold it to AJB Games. And yes, I said sold, that's a whole other deal. So I can 100% confirm that AJB Games did not know that the Sparky model in Bokkie contained copyrighted assets when the game came out. He absolutely did not know. And again, that is where it's totally worth having empathy for them. When this situation first started and he was first called out for copyright infringement, it was a legitimate shock to him because he actually did not know and got that model from what he believed to be a trusted source. But again, this does not absolve AJB Games of everything, because with the release of Pixelishious video, which was a week before the DMCA and 2 weeks before my video, irrefutable evidence that the model was stolen was now on display. So the catastrophic and horrific response from AJB Games following that, which was a pretty big part of my video, is still equally as horrific. I will cut them a little bit of slack, and I am willing to admit I should have said this in my first video, because there is most definitely a language barrier here. English is obviously not the native language of Morocco, and less than 20% of the population even speaks it. So that is definitely a part of the problem as far as the communication between AJB Games and myself, other parties, and the internet. When a boring native English speaker like myself accuses AJB Games of something with a bunch of unnecessary flowery language, it might not fully register. But regardless, when Pixel's video came out, there was proof that Bokkie was infringing on copyright, and that proof can be seen visually. So the insistent and constant claims from AJB that they didn't do anything does become a lie, even if it didn't start as one. I empathize with the fact that he accidentally committed copyright infringement because of the actions of others, and I do also understand that this level of stress can cause someone to act irrationally. I've been there plenty of times. But this erratic behavior does almost entirely erase AJB Games' innocence regardless. Not to mention, there was erratic and inappropriate behavior before Pixel's video even came out. But I do ultimately empathize with them, and I think you all should too, and he has apologized in private, even if he doesn't do the best at doing so publicly. But like I mentioned, despite the fact that Galactic Crows supplied the model, they didn't even make it! So who is this mystery modeler, and how did they fuck up this bad? Well, I was asked by the modeler and by Galactic Crows to keep this modeler anonymous. I really don't want to, but I like to think I have a certain level of journalistic integrity, and I want to encourage people to be comfortable talking on the record with me in the future, so this modeler will be remaining anonymous. But basically, this is how and why it happened. In 2022, Galactic Crows commissioned this freelance modeler to make this character model, and obviously Galactic Crows never ended up using it. This modeler thought at the time that if a model was available to be used on Sketchfab, and that if it was labeled as being allowed to be used, that meant it was totally legal and allowed to be used freely. It would be nice if this was true, but that is just very much not the case. There is plenty of copyrighted material on Sketchfab that says you're allowed to use it freely that will get you in serious trouble if you use it in a commercial product. Side note, shout out to this motherfucker that I found on Sketchfab. This has to go in the thumbnail or something. Shout out to No Don't Eat Me Queso Ferris Wheel. Anyway, this modeler thought if they got assets from Sketchfab that were labeled as free to use, then that meant it was clean. This is why they used a Huggy Wuggy model uploaded to Sketchfab as the base of the model. This is obviously a copyrighted model that someone just put on Sketchfab claiming it was legally allowed to be used. It should take the littlest common sense to know that this was a stupid idea, but I guess I just have to let that slide. So this modeler, which you may realize now that calling them a modeler is extremely generous, created this Mascot horror-y bunny character using the model of Huggy Wuggy and sold it to Galactic Crows for $150. You may be starting to learn why I wish I didn't have to keep this modeler anonymous, because they should be borderline sued out of existence, leaving them with literally nothing to their name. This guy charged someone that they had an existing working relationship with $150 for a model that they didn't make and couldn't be legally used. I guess they didn't know that the model couldn't be legally used, but that is still a disgusting price for the lack of work actually done. So Galactic Crows pays for this model in 2022, and then roughly a year or two later sells it to AJB Games for $80. They claim to have not known it wasn't allowed to be used, and I'm gonna take their word on that because I'm guessing they were young when they commissioned the model and simply trusted that the modeler knew what they were talking about when they said it was safe. But $80 for the work that was done here, still a little steep. So that is how the model of hit mascot horror character Sparky came to be. A freelance modeler for some reason thought that using the Huggy Wuggy model was safe as long as Sketchfab told him it was. He basically scammed Galactic Crows, whether or not that was intentional, and Galactic Crows basically scammed AJB Games, whether or not that was intentional. Truly shocking stuff here. But we are not done talking about this modeler. Just because I have to keep him anonymous does not mean I'm not going to rip into him. This modeler is not on the team of Galactic Crows. Galactic Crows is pretty much completely solo, but they do apparently work with them closely and often, which is already worth talking about. I said this to Galactic Crows directly, and I'm going to say it again now. I know you don't want your name and brand to be mixed in with drama and controversy, but if that happens due to your actions, you have no one to blame but yourself. Even if you were misled by this modeler, you are already guilty of selling this copyrighted model to another developer and potentially getting them in real legal trouble. You may still be a victim in this story, but you also bear responsibility for that. And the very modeler that caused this to happen to you and AJB Games is apparently someone you still work with frequently? That is the most terrifying red flag I've ever heard in my life. How sure can you be that he hasn't supplied you with models that are also made up of copyrighted material? If this person, even if it was 2 years ago, but if this person used the Huggy Wuggy model as a base for a model that they charged $150 for, it wouldn't surprise me if you have given them thousands of dollars for models that they didn't really make. And maybe you thought that was okay, and I don't know the truth behind that. Maybe that has never happened even once besides this one instance, but it sounds like that's entirely possible from my perspective. If this modeler has contributed literally anything to any one of the games currently published under your brand, I think you need to immediately do a thorough investigation into each and every single one of them. Because if this guy genuinely thought at any point in time that what he pulled for that bunny model was acceptable, anything he has ever touched needs to be investigated, because it could literally be breaking the law. This is legitimately very serious for the parties involved. Sure, a company like Mob doesn't stand much to lose by these things, and the players might not care, but breaking copyright laws is not a nothing burger. But you know who seems to think it is? The goddamn modeler. After talking to both AJB Games and Galactic Crows and hearing how they weren't even really guilty as far as the initial copyright infringement goes, I needed to talk to this modeler. I didn't think they'd be willing to, but I absolutely had to. And we actually did get in contact via Discord, and they did provide a statement. This is their statement. I won't read it in full out loud, but you can pause if you need to. This is the worst response I have gotten to anything in my entire career. I've gotten responses to my videos from 14-year-olds that had a better point to make than this one. They do explain how they were confused by the terms of Sketchfab, which I would understand if it wasn't literally straight up the Huggy Wuggy model, but that's fine, that's whatever. They say that the model wasn't made for Bokkie or for the dev, which is true, I do know that, but it's also not really anything of note. But it's the third paragraph that genuinely really fucking grinds my gears. For one, they immediately claim they refuse to take any responsibility. They straight up say they will not take any responsibility because as a freelancer, they don't decide what the model is used for. That doesn't fucking matter. It does not matter in the slightest who the model was made for or what the model is made for. It's expected that when a model is commissioned and paid for, that the model won't cause the entire game it's used for or whatever product it's used for to become illegal. That is what we call a scam. Accidental or not, that means you created a scam. And then they say, Galactic Crows and I are indie developers who work purely out of passion, so making a big deal out of my literal fucking crime isn't really cool of you. You are scum of the earth for this sentence. I don't care if you are an indie dev. By committing crimes within the indie dev space, you are harming indie devs. Me calling you idiots out for this type of behavior benefits the indie space, because it's you guys that are harming it with this behavior in the first place. If Bokkie was just a bad indie horror game, I would have never made a video on it. If Galactic Crows was just making bad indie horror games, I'd never make a video on them. The reason my video had to be made is because literal crimes were being committed, and that's worthy of talking about. The only reason I talk about these types of games when I do off-stream is because I care about this space. The reason I cracked down on Mascot, bro, is because I thought there was genuine risk of harming young indie devs in this space. That's the reason I made that video, and I like to think I did a pretty good job with it. In this case, I don't really care if Mob is getting stolen from. I am a Mob partner and I respect them and all that, but that's not the reason I made the video. The reason I made the video is because when people in this space are caught stealing, that immediately gives the whole space a really bad look, because the indie/mascot horror field already has a terrible reputation, even though there's so many developers in this space that are trying really hard to make good work. So when stuff like this happens, it hurts those good people too, and that's why I call people like you out for doing these wrong things. The lack of care on display here is deplorable, and I think they realized that, albeit a bit late. They made it clear that they didn't want to comment any further, so I just said thank you for the statement and unfriended them, making it so they couldn't message me again. That wasn't intentional, but that is how it ended up working. But then about an hour after they made this statement, they sent me a follow-up via email. They apologized for sounding rude, they said they take full responsibility for what happened, and they are willing to speak about it further. I didn't respond to this email, and I am not going to, because this total change of tone is so jarring, and that leads me to believe that it's completely phony. Maybe they told Galactic Crows or someone else what they said, and then they expressed how bad of a statement this was. I have no idea, but their first response is really goddamn disgusting, and makes them out to be the absolute villain of the story. But then they completely walk it back with a follow-up message, so I have no idea what their stance is, but their first statement makes me so genuinely angry that I do not have a desire to engage any further. I think aside from doing a thorough investigation on any projects that this developer had a hand in, the smartest thing Galactic Crows could do is just cut ties with the guy already. If there is a level of friendship there, I understand that makes it difficult, but the guy basically scammed you, which caused you to scam someone else, which caused that someone else to break copyright laws, and then the modeler's response to all of that is one of the most inhuman things I've seen on the internet. So, where does that leave us? Galactic Crows is the easiest to clear up. They did supply the model and charge for it, but they've said they are going to refund AJB by the end of the month, and they genuinely didn't know in the first place. $80 was definitely too much for the model, whether or not it was legally allowed to be used, but it's kind of whatever as long as they refund the guy. They cannot be called innocent per se, because AJB would have never used the model if it weren't for them, but I do see it as an honest mistake. Galactic Crows does seem like they genuinely cared about this situation and the people involved. I have no problems with them. Go check out the games they publish because a lot of talented, rule-following people do work on them. As far as AJB Games, the developer of Bokkie, goes, he mostly just needs to work on the way he behaves online and the way he responds to these types of situations. I've never felt so conflicted on a person than I do with this guy right now. Because even as this update video is being made, he keeps implying to people that he didn't do anything wrong, which he did. The irrefutable evidence that Bokkie infringed on copyright has been out there for weeks, and the way he handled the situation for the last many weeks basically removes his innocence. But ultimately, he is also still a victim here. When he was making the game and when he released it, he did not know there was copyrighted material, because he trusted the source the model came from. And of course, he is also not a native English speaker, so I am sure the language barrier was a part of the problem with how they addressed it. I don't really think AJB Games is a bad person, and I do wish them the best with their ongoing projects, but he also cannot be fully absolved because his behavior and handling of everything was irrational and inappropriate. And this modeler that I have to keep anonymous is all over the place. This situation was seemingly an honest mistake, which I can empathize with, but it's a pretty crazy mistake, and it does make me worry for any projects that they may have been a part of since. And their initial response to the situation does not ease my worry because they expressed so little care for the problem or the people affected, and they tried to tell me that by talking about it, I'm causing the problem, which is so fucking rich. But then they walked that back and were more civil and remorseful, which completely threw me through a loop. Obviously, if anyone cannot be cleared here, it's the modeler, but I cannot tell if they're the worst person I've ever interacted with, or just an idiot that misspoke. I guess I'll leave that one up to you. Because of this situation, Moozy Dark Toyland has been cancelled. Now that I know AJB Games and Galactic Crows were both unaware of the initial copyright infringement, I do somewhat feel like the project could have kept going, but again, AJB Games' behavior was still really bad, so I think this being their punishment for that is totally fair. Moozy Chapter 2 will still happen in the future from the original developer, so Moozy fans are not left with nothing. It'll just take some time. Bokkie has yet to receive its second DMCA. I am not sure when that will happen, but it is inevitable. But this time around, AJB Games does intend on fully replacing the model or simply removing the game permanently. We will have to wait to see what happens. Ultimately, nobody here is fully innocent. Everybody involved ended up doing something wrong, but at the same time, there are people that can absolutely be forgiven, and hopefully none of these people will repeat the mistakes that they did during this process. That's where this ends. No matter what happens, I am not making a part 3. Go check out Pixelicious, go check out ML Spence, go play some of Galactic Crows games if you want, be on the lookout for the next AJB Games game if you want, and subscribe whether or not you want. You have no choice for that one. That'll be all from me. Thank you for everything. I'll see you guys later.